Hi guys, Miss Francis here. I want to revisit some important vocabulary before we jump into the mathematics of the Hardy-Weinberg theorem. Three important vocabulary words so far. Genetic drift involves changes in the gene pool of a small population due to chance. The example I gave was, let's suppose we have an earthquake, and in a population of 10 million people, if 3 people die from that earthquake, the gene pool will not be drastically changed. However, if let's say I have that earthquake and I only have a population of 20 people and now 3 out of those 20 people die, there will be a dramatic effect on the gene pool of that population. So like I said, genetic drift, changes in the gene pool of a small population due to chance. Gene flow is the loss or gain of alleles from a population due to either movement of individuals into that population or movement of individuals out of that population. And the last important vocabulary word that I'd like to review before we jump into the math of Hardy-Weinberg is a mutation. A mutation is just a change in the DNA, which then alters the gene pool. It adds alleles to the gene pool. So here's the math of Hardy-Weinberg. It involves 2 separate equations. The first equation, p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1, where p plus q equals 1. So what does each part of this equation represent? Well, let's tackle this first part. So p squared refers to individuals that are homozygous dominant. 2pq refers to individuals that are heterozygous dominant, and q squared refers to individuals that are homozygous recessive. Notice, in all of these cases, we were talking about individual people, individual organisms, or individual phenotypes. Now, if we're given alleles or allelic frequencies, or the frequency of the alleles, we're talking about this second equation, where P has to do with the dominant trait or the dominant allele as relative to the gene pool. Q represents the recessive trait or the recessive allele as relative to the gene pool. Sometimes it can be given in a percentage, where if I add P plus Q, I'm always going to get number 1. It's always going to add up to 1. Sorry, you're not always going to get number 1. It adds up to number 1. And basically, when I'm talking about P and Q, I'm talking about allelic frequencies. So, as I said before, the combined frequencies must add up to 100. Therefore, P plus Q must equal 1. So if we look at our flower example, right, we looked at the alleles for being dominant and the allele for being recessive. So if we were to take a look at what each one of those would represent within the Hardy-Weinberg equation, well, if I was looking at the frequency of the dominant allele, that means I'm looking for P. If I was looking at the frequency for the recessive allele, that means that I'm looking at Q. Now, if I wanted to solve for the percent of the population that's homozygous dominant, heterozygous, or homozygous recessive, well, then I'm looking back at that first equation, where I'm looking to solve for P squared, 2pq, or q squared. And because I already have P and Q, it's just a plug and chug type of problem. However, what if I'm given this example? I'm given the information that 1 in 10,000 babies that are born in the United States are born with PKU, which is caused by a recessive allele. Now I'm given the number of individuals. Because I'm given the number of individuals, I'm talking about that first equation, that red one. I'm not talking about allele frequencies. I'm given individuals that have the recessive trait. So I'm talking about Q squared. Because I have Q squared, now I might be able to figure out some other parts of the Hardy-Weinberg equation. I can put Q squared into decimal form. 1 over 10,000 is 0.0001. Now let's say the question further goes on to ask to calculate the number of heterozygous carriers. We know that heterozygous carriers in the context of Hardy-Weinberg is equal to 2pq. Well, I already know q squared. From q squared, I can calculate q. Now, once I'm given q, I can then figure out p. How do I do that? Because I know that p plus q is equal to 1. Therefore, p must equal 0.99. And now it's just a plug and chug. 2 times 0.99 times 0.01. And I end up with 0.0198. Now, if I was asked what percentage of the population that makes up, that's approximately 2%. And to take it a step further, let's say the problem asked us, well, if I have this many individuals in the entire population, how many will be carriers of PKU? Well, I just found out how many would be carriers of PKU. I just found out 2PQ is equal to 0.0198, which is approximately 2%. So if I take my total population and multiply it by that approximate percentage of the population, I would find out how many individuals are carriers of PKU. My recommendation is to visit Pearson's lab bench. All you have to do is type into Google Pearson Lab Bench Population Genetics, and you will get the following website. And then if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that there are different concepts. If you revisit concept 7, it re-talks about the Hardy-Weinberg equation in general. And then there are 3 practice problems that I suggest you visit.